Hi, everyone. It's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elizabeth Alfano, and I'm so happy to be here with you today. I started the Plant-Based Business Hour because I want to highlight the innovators, the CEOs, the entrepreneurs, the startups, the analysts, the investors who are looking to reinvent the meat and dairy space. Ultimately, and I think COVID has shown us all this, if we want a safe and secure future, we need a safe and secure food supply, and we all know that that is plant-based. So today I'm talking about, is China going to go vegan? That's 1.4 billion people. What would it take to get China to go vegan? I'm going to bring on my experts here. Let's just dive right in and get into it because they know more about China certainly than I do. Tao Zhang and Albert Tseng. Thank you both for being with me.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to be here.
So happy to have you here. Okay, now the two of you are co-founders of Dao Foods, and that is a collaborative with the Good Food Institute, which we love, and New Crop Capital. And ultimately, it seems that your goal in China is to create community with plant-based festivals and forums and summits, to be mentors and to incubate with new ideas, new companies, new founders, and then to invest and partner and take those companies larger scale. It's very exciting because with 1.4 billion people in China, there's so much potential there. Before I really get into all that you do at Dao Foods, let me quickly go over your extensive bios, but I want to tell everybody that, you can get more information at daofoods.com/about. Okay, Tao is also the founder and managing director of Dao Ventures, a cross-border impact investment advisory and accelerator group in both China and the United States. And this group encompasses the China Impact Fund, China's first impact fund that specializes in supporting environmental, small and medium-sized enterprises. He was also the global COO of New Ventures, the Center of Environmental Entrepreneurship at the World Resources Institute, also an organization that I love. Prior to this, you were really in the high-tech sector and telecom sector, and you've worked with the Chinese government before at the Xinhua
News Agency. Yeah.
Xinhua News Agency.
I was a journalist. That's my first job in China.
Yes. So you're going to talk to us all about that because the media does play a large role in if people are going to be plant-based or not.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Albert has over 20 years experience spanning from impact investment and social enterprise in international development to business development and management consulting in the medical technology field. So I love that you bring that to the table. You're also the founder of Moonspire Social Ventures, which invests in social enterprises and funds that have business models that impact the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You were a COO at Blue Dot, a social enterprise in global health, again, bringing your medical expertise. You have an MPA from Harvard University and a biomedical engineering degree and a mechanical engineering degree. Okay, so if anyone's going to turn China around, it is you two. That is well established. Okay, one more statistic, and then I'm really going to give you guys the floor, and you go from here. 1980, China, 1 billion people. Fast forward 40 years, the country grows 40%, and they take what used to be 30 pounds of meat per person in 1980, and it becomes 140 pounds a person in 2020. And the country's grown 40%. This makes China twice as much of a meat-consuming economy than the U.S. and a force to be reckoned with. So before we go forward, we have to know where we've come from. How does a primarily vegan culture go to 140 pounds of meat per person a year? Hop in.
Sure. Thank you, Elizabeth. We're so glad that you're doing this work and profiling the important work of all these entrepreneurs out there in the plant-based space. So thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you.
So the one part of that statistic is that the average North American eats 220 pounds a year.
Correct.
Right. And so it's actually still not matching. It's still a far cry actually from the average North American. So of course it's coming from 30 pounds per capita, but it's still not the level of meat consumption in industrialized countries or other industrialized countries. And so that is just the trend of development. If you look at most countries around the world, anytime you see incomes rising, you actually have increasing meat consumption as well. So it's the natural path, But as you mentioned, 1.4 billion people is a significant amount of the world's population, 20% of the world's population, and in fact, only 7% of the world's arable land. So when we look at a supply-demand, just a pure economic, if we're not even considering environmental or ethical concerns, this is just a supply-demand curve that just can't be met using existing industrial animal agriculture. And so that was the impetus for us starting Dao Foods. Was we sort of saw that this challenge needs solutions. And I actually, when I was at my former company, we were venture financed by Horizons Ventures, which is sort of Li Ka-shing's private investment arm. And within that portfolio, there was Zoom, Spotify, Waze, a lot of internet companies. I was there on the big data and health side, but there was also food tech companies. So Impossible Foods was as part of that portfolio, Perfect Day, Modern Meadow, many companies that we're all familiar with. And every year they would bring all the portfolio companies together, and we would just trade stories. And that's in 2014 was the year that I first tried my first Impossible Burger. At that time, I think it was just very early days, and we each got to try a quarter of a burger at that time because it was so expensive.
Very expensive.
I got the chance to meet Pat Brown and Nick Halla and the team over there, and just was inspired by the mission of the organization. And as I tasted it, I said, "Wow, this even at that early version was quite good." And so I started getting educated about, I was just, a regular person that didn't understand the impact of our food system. I was quite ignorant, actually, to the impact that the food system has on environment and a whole host of issues. And so I started doing research on my own. And then this question of China became sort of spotlighted for me in terms of all the statistics that we just talked about. And so most of the innovation was very much focused on the US and Europe. And Tao and I, back in 2010, we had been classmates together at the Harvard Kennedy School. And he was a scholar from Beijing. And I called up Tao and I said, what are you doing from an impact perspective with regard to the food system? And he said, I've always wanted to actually, bring consumers into this fold of trying to solve China's environmental problems. So that was kind of the impetus for how we started, was this inspiration by innovators, but also seeing the challenges in China and how do we actually try to bring that innovation towards China.
Tao, I don't know if you can comment on this, but again, I'll let you two kind of paddle between yourselves for the responses, but so much is backing why this would be a slam dunk. So the environmental issues, you're trying to feed 1.4 billion people with only 7% arable land. We've seen the health implications. So the Chinese government must be watching their health costs skyrocket as they go from 30 pounds of meat a person to 140 pounds of meat. This should be a slam dunk, but we see in the United States, it's not. We still have so many hurdles, such as subsidies and culture. What are some of the hurdles that keep this from being so easy in China? Because you already have the history of being basically vegan prior to 1980.
Right. Well, in a way, because I was born in China, grew up in China, in Chinese cuisine, in a way, you can, from a Chinese cuisine perspective, you pretty much can consider every Chinese like flexitarian. So because in Chinese meals, the meat hadn't been the center of the plate, probably from a long time ago. It's always, we call it 有荤有素. So basically half plant-based, half meat. So that's the way, Chinese people eat meals. And that's probably considered the most balanced meal you can have, in the Chinese food culture. So basically like a yin and yang kind of balance, right? So that's why, given China's a long history of plant-based, I think if people want to promote like plant-based in China, the way we're doing in the US is probably there's different set of challenges. People who are working in this sector needs to overcome in order to make this country more plant-based. So in a way, I think China is already plant-based, in a way, because everybody's flexitarian. But at the same time, because China's huge market size, such a big population, you want to make China more plant-based, as much as plant-based as possible, right? In order to reduce the economic, the environmental, minimize the environmental costs, the healthcare costs, things like that, even food security costs, right? So,
Sure.
in a way, even from a Chinese government perspective, I think like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people were talking about like food security problem. So basically, if there's a lack of food, so it could threaten the national security, right? So of the country. And I think also China is probably on a moving forward basis could be facing like a meat security issue, right? So that's another thing, the Chinese government stakeholders need to consider for the long term, especially given there's so many people, like Albert has pointed out, they want to eat meat as their livelihoods. Their life standards is going up. They need to eat more meat and even more quality meat. So that's why China's consumption of meat is going up, especially compared with other big economies. So from where I stand, I've been doing impact investing primarily in environmental sector space in China. So, but most of the environmental small, medium-sized enterprises we have supported are pretty much on the industrial side of things. So, like renewable energy, waste management, water management, recycling, that kind of small, medium-sized enterprises. We have a couple of environmental education companies we have supported that focus on helping steer consumer behavior, especially consumer behavior of younger generation people, towards more eco-friendly. But that's far from enough, right? So because China has such a big population, if everybody continues to eat a lot of meat, I mean that's definitely is a huge environmental burden to China, and by extension globally. So that's why I've been thinking how to make Chinese consumers part of China's environmental solution. So that's why 3 years ago I reconnected with Albert, and also at the meeting Bruce Friedrich, founder of Good Feeding Institute, was there. That's kind of my epiphany moment. So I thought, oh, this is something that we should do, in order to make Chinese consumers, especially the mainstream consumers, part of the solution. And this is not something we can impose on Chinese mainstream consumer, because they love food. They love the taste. They love and this is something that's in their part of their culture. You cannot get rid of that. But you need to from my perspective, the alternative protein products, if you have the right product, if right taste, right price, right accessibility, is something you can leverage to replace the traditional meat product, animal meat products they have been eating, they have been enjoying. So to do in long story short, that's so we decided to set up Dao Foods International together in collaboration with New Crop Capital and Good Food Institute.
So much to unpack there. You've said so many things. Some of them I'd like to revisit, and we can take a different stance on it. So we talk about, meat consumption is actually on the decline in the United States, the same with Western Europe, but it's up across the world, basically because of China and India. And so it's up 2% globally, even though it's down in the United States and down in Western Europe. And we talk about, well, as people get wealthier, they want meat. But I just want to understand the Chinese culture a little bit more. Here in the US, we have, basically campaigns miseducating people that they need to get protein from animal products, which is absolutely false. Is it a status thing in China that when people get more money, they want to show that they've got meat? Or is it an educational thing? As the whole country gets wealthier, they're being advertised to and marketed to, perhaps with nutritionally incorrect information.
Yeah, I think it is a sign of affluence, certainly, in China. If you are
status.
Yeah, if you have a banquet, and the banquet is somewhat judged on the number of meat dishes and the number of seafood dishes.
It's a big hurdle.
the expensive dishes and the way that you show your guests that you appreciate them, right? And so I think, but I mean, I think there's it is partly education, right? So for example, there was a huge shark's fin. So shark's fin was obviously a huge delicacy in China and in the rest of Asia. And Yao Ming was very powerful in being able to kind of bring up the problems associated with shark's fin. And so there are definitely examples of how education can actually change the tide towards, you know, consumer attitudes towards food. And so I think that's what we're trying to do is, you know, we're not trying to preach. What we're trying to do is support entrepreneurs that are creating products that allow consumers to, you know, enjoy and feel good about consuming the food, and then have all those additional benefits of being better for their health, better for the planet, and better for animals. So that's the approach that we're taking. I think that's the way where we feel that most change can happen. But certainly there are a lot of cultural headwinds that we have to deal with, and that's where we need the innovation and talents of entrepreneurs to help move us.
Most definitely, but you do have some tailwinds. So we had talked about politics and that they had decided that pangolin, for example, would no longer be allowed on Western, I'm getting this wrong, I'm sorry, I don't know the exact term for it, but an Eastern medicine approved list. That's the wrong term for sure, but but they had intervened there. And then again, we talked about rising healthcare costs. Obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic. That's caused a lot of economic stress on everyone. You talk about food insecurity and Asian swine flu, which started in the United States. So it's not a thing particular to Asian, but it has decimated the pig populations, making the rising costs of pigs, just showing to the government, I would think, how unsustainable this is. Obviously, the environmental impact. And then I would say, if you are in trade talk, if you can't produce your own food yourself, and it's very hard for any country to produce enough food for 1.4 billion people, and then you are reliant on an outside source, such as perhaps the United States, and you happen to be in trade talks with them, you can't really take a powerful business trade stance if you are negotiating with someone who controls your food supply. So I think from a government standpoint, they would be wanting to get to plant-based as soon as possible. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's actually the meat security issue I was talking about. So
yes.
Basically, if say China has to rely on soybeans, say other feedstock from the U.S. and other countries, and in a way, with the U.S.-China decoupling, the tensions going on between these two countries moving forward, that could be an issue for China's it could be even threatening, to stability of the society, So internally 100%. In China, so so that's why I'm not sure this is something that already on the agenda of Chinese government stakeholders, but I think long term, either way, of course we are doing this from environmental point of view, from environmental angle, but I think in terms of the meat security challenge I was talking about, China is confronted with. I think this is definitely something that China would like to or need to solve, So for the long term. Yeah.
And have they showed any interest in what you're doing, or how are they supporting you, if at all, in Dao Foods?
So we are not necessarily seeking support from the government side, for what we do, for a variety of reasons. But we are engaging, government stakeholders in a process of doing things, because we want them to see what we do, see the entrepreneurs we support, see the products that could be coming out of these entrepreneurs, so they understand the benefit, So of doing this kind of alternative protein products, so to speak, and why this is so important, and why there's realistic solution, that based on what we do to the China set of problems they need to solve, So as policymakers, so I think but at the same time, we are careful in terms of how to collaborate with the government stakeholders in China, because as you probably know, that entrepreneurs, at the end of the day, the entrepreneurs, they are here to disrupt the status quo, So they probably don't want the government stakeholders' policies policymaker to step in too early before they become sophisticated, before they become knowledgeable about this space, to come up with the wrong policies, right, to kill innovation of these entrepreneurs. So especially for plant-based, it could be tricky. So, but at the same time, we work with like government-backed science and technology parks in China to hold forums, to hold seminars, to educate people, local different stakeholders from China about plant-based, about alternative protein in general. So that's we call it next generation good food, right, for China. So I think that's probably more appealing marketing term that we would like to use, not only for the different stakeholders, particularly with the young generation consumers in China. That seems to be, productive in the sense that people they identify themselves as good food, right? But when you talk about alternative protein products, or or cultured meat or clean meat, plant-based, that's probably more technical kind of terms. So we have been that's why we have done like 2 boot camps in Beijing and in Shanghai in 2019. So our boot camp is called Next Generation Good Food Boot Camp. So this way we attracted stakeholders who from the mainstream, right, from the mainstream business community, from the mainstream investor community to come to our forum, to come to our boot camps. So because they heard about the good food, and they know this is something very interesting. Next, especially is next generation good food. Because our the target audience of Dao Foods through the entrepreneurs we support, or we like support, is mainly young millennials in China, and there's already 400 million of them, because we believe this young millennials, they are probably more quick to adopt this, or more willing to try out this next generation novelty good food, right? So and once they try it, they like it, I think they will definitely, hopefully they will become like repeated users of this product. That way, the next generation, consumer behavior will definitely will be changed for the better, and maybe hopefully in turn they can also influence other demographic as well, their parents, their grandparents, because they eat the food they like, and they say to their parents, oh, maybe this is something you should try. So that's and of course they will have influence on their kids, right? On a moving forward basis.
Yes, and there again, so you've got 400,000 millennials, which
400 million.
400 million. So obviously a force to be
Yeah.
reckoned with, more than the United States. More people than are in the United States are millennials in China. And again, I would think this would be a tailwind. You say alternative proteins, but tofu's nothing new in China, and tempeh's nothing new in China.
Exactly.
And I don't know if
Yeah.
seitan is considered a new and alternative thing, but I don't know. But so some of these products and their bases are already part of your history.
Yeah, because when we talk about plant-based, use the term plant-based in China when we started, and people were kind of confused, basically saying that we have plant-based from a long time ago, right? So,
Yes, yeah.
so that's what I said, 有荤有素, yin and yang kind of in Chinese cuisine. So the consumer awareness of plant-based is always there, but of course the definition of plant-based in US and Europe is very much different from the plant-based concept, right? That has been inherent in Chinese food culture, from a long time ago. So that's why we want to position our what we promote, from a food perspective, next generation good food. So because we want to educate or enlighten the mainstream consumers to the extent that they understand this is something different. This is something different, because the traditional Chinese plant-based concept is not necessarily like a protein kind of alternative product, and they are not necessarily nutritional either, but they could be nutritional, but definitely not as nutritional as the meat products, right? Chinese consumers are consuming. So basically, what we are doing is through the entrepreneurs is hopefully come up with the right products to or to replace the meat products to the extent that to make people understand that even plant-based could be meat alternatives. Because in China's concept, the traditional concept of plant-based is not a substitute for meat, right? So but plant-based needs to exist together with meat products. So we have this yin and yang balance from a nutrition perspective. But at the same time, so whether they think, there's plant-based alternatives that can be used to replace the meat and even make the meals, their food more nutritional, more healthy, more environmental friendly. That's a different kind of level of awareness we need to create. So that's why it's challenging.
So I see what you're saying, though. There's a difference there for sure. You just can't have a protein replacement. You actually, like tempeh might be, you actually need that imitation, I'll call it pork, or that pork substitute, because either way you're going to have that culturally accepted yin and yang soup. And so if you take out the pork, you got to put something pork-like back in. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you need to put something in that not in terms of nutrition, but also in terms of taste, in terms of probably price, and texture, so that that's why, because Chinese consumers compare with, from a food perspective, compare with consumers in the US and Europe are more discerning, and they are more, because they have a much wider diversity of food choices from different geographies, so how to make plant-based, like alternative protein products. For now, I think it's mainly plant-based. A new established entrenched product category that and based on that, people just go out and say, I need to eat something plant-based for today's meal, right? I need to have plant-based 3 days a week or 2 meals a day. That kind of mentality, that kind of needs to be there first before there's a market for plant-based alternative protein products. So that's the challenge, I would say, because in the US and Europe, what's different is if you look at a history of US and Europe, there has been probably say 30 years, 40 years of education, foundational work that has been done, right, by NGOs, by animal welfare, either environmental NGOs, animal welfare kind of NGOs. So people starting, either whether they are conscious of it or not, but because through this, this so many years of brainwashing, right? So I hate to use the word brainwashing, but people started to have that consciousness or awareness of this kind of product. What they need is just real good products, right? So like good products from Impossible, like Beyond, once they have the good product, okay, that's what I'm gonna go for, right? So because the awareness is already there.
Again, so much to unpack there. You're right. There had been, at first I thought you were talking about the education or miseducation about how much we need meat. And that's been going on clearly longer than 40 years. But in terms of the alternative products, that's been maybe going on for 30 or 40 years, but you almost can't even count the pre-Impossible and Beyond Meat era because you didn't have the product. So it was almost frustrating for people to even discuss it. Right. I just want to summarize a little bit of what you said, and then I'm going to go to Albert for a second. But you have a tricky dilemma there because we keep using the terminology plant-based, and that's meant to be this meat alternative, but you almost can't use that in China because they've always considered themselves plant-based with meat, which is sort of an interesting dichotomy. So you need to figure out that unique product that's going to really replace on a one-for-one basis. And I'm going to throw it to Albert. I'm wondering, when you do that, so I interviewed David Young of OmniPork on this show. Maybe you know him. And he said a phrase that I do love him. He said a phrase that has stuck with me. We have to outcool meat and dairy because that's what's going to appeal to the millennials. And we need to find a way to make this a status situation. And I'm wondering if you subscribe to that philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you have to make this desirable, right, for the younger population. There has to be a value proposition that you're presenting to consumers to try something new, because we are presenting something new to the consumer. This is why, I think if we look at it from a macro perspective of our ultimate goal is to reduce the demand for animal protein, right? And so all the things that we talked about earlier, government support, we need all those things to get to scale. But at the very beginning, when there are no products, we need to actually spur on the innovation. And that's why we've decided to support entrepreneurs, right? And so, our experience working with New Crop and the Good Food Institute, when you rewind the clock back 6 or 7 years, when Impossible and Beyond were just starting to make a name for themselves, the landscape of plant-based was pretty empty, right? Not many companies, right? But they became sort of beachheads or hero organizations when they started getting funding, when they started getting into restaurants. Then you start to see entrepreneurs coming into the sector, right? And then now we were at the World Plant-Based Expo last year in New York, and you go to the show floor and there are like hundreds of companies there, right? And so this has not happened in China yet. So while we hear the news globally of all this plant-based food innovation, it just is at a very nascent phase in China. And so that's what essentially we're trying to do is, we need governments, we need large-scale food producers and all those things, but it's probably not the right timing, right? What we need to do is involve them and educate them as to what's happening. But for us, that's why one of the reasons why we started the incubator is we want to support 5 companies every 6 months to become those kinds of organizations. And over 3 years, if we can support 30, entrepreneurs that are creating different types of products, different kinds of services, creating different value propositions for consumers, then you're going to get that crowding in of talent, resources, capital into building this plant-based ecosystem. And so, we don't think of it as one product, right? We think of it as, we need to, as Tao mentioned, the Chinese cuisine is so diverse, right? Each region of China has its own culinary histories, culinary habits, and so each of those different regions will have different products that might appeal to those consumers. And so what we want to do is basically support the entrepreneurs that understand those trends, understand how do we integrate tofu with a new product. Maybe it's like who knows, maybe a raw vegan product might work, right? In one sector, right? But we I think want to maintain our humility to say that we don't necessarily know all the things, and I think it's anyone's best guess at how the plant-based industry will evolve in China. We might have our guesses, but really what we need is action on the ground to make these things happen and discover what actually works. And so the way we think about it is, let's increase our toolkit, right? Get more entrepreneurship, more innovation, more product development, and then see what works, and then continue to scale and provide resources to those that are successful, such that we can build momentum in the sector.
Well, that's why I wanted to talk so much about the history of China and the cultural headwinds and tailwinds that you might have, so that we could get into really what I wanted to talk about, which is where you guys are right now and what kind of trends you're seeing. So I believe you've already started with your incubator program. Is that correct? You've already had companies go through. Do I have that right?
We just closed the registration for the first cohort.
Okay, so the first 5. Okay.
Yeah, the first 5. Yeah.
Have you picked them yet, or you've just closed the application?
We're in the process of picking the top 5. So we already picked a few. So it's still in the process of talking to other entrepreneurs.
Okay, so I don't know if you can tell us this, but generally speaking, what are you seeing as these people come to you and present their ideas? You probably had more applicants that you can take. What are you generally seeing in terms of innovation for plant-based in China?
Yeah, we're excited about it. I mean, I think when we first started in 2017 or late 2017, early 2018, we had somewhat naively said, let's just raise a fund and start investing in China, right? And what we quickly realized when we spent more time on the ground trying to talk to innovators, it was very early stage, right? And so we started doing events and forums to try to bring out the entrepreneurs. And as Tao mentioned, we hosted boot camps where we would bring 100 people together, where it would be 50% entrepreneurs, 25% investors, 25% industry, food industry people. And certainly there was a lot of interest because they were seeing what was happening internationally, but there wasn't a lot of action yet. And so that was kind of the state of the field about 2 years ago. But what we've seen is a shift. And when we launched the call for entrepreneurs for the incubator, we were pleasantly surprised at the number of local entrepreneurs that were getting into the game. So that ranges from alternative dairy products, yogurt products, milk products, coffee creamers, to like meat, seafood. And so we're seeing definitely a lot of action, still pretty early stage, but we're excited about the energy that is evolving. I mean, I think that people are taking cues as well internationally. Obviously, the Beyond Meat IPO kind of gave a lot of confidence to entrepreneurs to say, hey, there's people that are interested in this, and that it'll eventually, when they look, I think anytime anyone looks at the data that we talked about at the very beginning of the call, they understand that diversification of protein has to happen. There's no way that the world will continue on this path. And when you look at those numbers and when you open your eyes to it, you realize that this is not only better for the planet, but it's also a business opportunity that is good. And so, and then also the boot camps that we've been hosting have brought together those, we were very pleasantly surprised at the number of investors, the number of food industry executives that come out to these events because they want to meet the innovators, right? So you have the executive from Starbucks in China meeting with an early stage entrepreneur, right? That is more energy for that early stage entrepreneur than you can
imagine, right?
And so that's the type of activity that we feel is necessary in China, is this convening, is this providing resources and injecting energy into these entrepreneurs. And our belief is that entrepreneurs are the ones that are going to make things happen. And so we want to try to get as many resources as we can to those entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it's just great. I love that you say that you're seeing seafood. So you're seeing some plant-based seafood options. I think that's such an underserved part. And so very interesting. So like we said in the beginning, and like you're reiterating here, so really Dao Foods does more than just mentor and incubate and then later invest. You also try to create community. Of course, a lot of ideas come out of community. By that, I mean boot camps and forums and festivals. And I'm sure the Good Food Institute has been very helpful therein. And then obviously incubating and investing, probably New Crop Capital has been helpful therein as well. But you are creating sort of from start to finish this process of ideation and then bringing to market. And so it's interesting what you're seeing come to market, dairy creamers. Now that's very interesting to me. A country that really has no dairy history, you're seeing creamers come up in the innovation application process. I'm surprised.
Yeah, I mean, Starbucks has been very successful.
Okay, there they are again, Starbucks. Yeah. There they are. Okay.
And so coffee, and this is what gives us a lot of hope as well. I mean, not only did we, we started the call by saying 1980, 30 pounds of meat per capita to now 140 pounds. Certainly within that 40 years, dietary patterns has changed quite drastically. And we believe that will continue this change, right? And so very, very adaptable, and we believe that we can push it in the right direction if we have the right people working on these issues and creating the right products. So, certainly I think there's so many categories that can be explored, and that as long as you have the right teams and people and talent focused on them, that we can get push the food system in the right direction.
I think it's interesting. I'll throw it to Tao, but I think it's interesting that you say, obviously, eating patterns have changed. A lot of Western foods have come in. I would say perhaps nutritionally, that's not clear if that's better or not. Of course, with more wealth, you have more food in general, and that perhaps is healthier for people who weren't eating as much as calories as maybe they wanted. But now you also have generations of people who are eating the kind of calories that you don't want. I'm wondering, as you approach millennials, Tao, do you do it sort of with the environmental hook or the health and nutrition hook?
We don't generally, encourage our entrepreneurs to adopt the environmental kind of approach, because that could be, you could meet resistance, right, from some of the mainstream consumers, because they probably they could be skeptical in the sense that, okay, you're going to impose something that is not tasty but environmental friendly upon me as a consumer. So then there could be skepticism in that regard. But at the same time, so we when we approach like young consumers, when we talk to them, I think there's a few things we need to we have been wary of, right? Of course, taste, price, accessibility is still the top purchase factors, right, of this young millennial mainstream consumers when it comes to food. But at the same time, the young millennials using food more and more as a means to express themselves. So either they want to look, they post pictures on WeChat, on China's equivalent of WhatsApp or Facebook, and social media channels, because they want to look cool, they want to look different. So that's definitely the younger generation people when it comes to food, right, are starting to do more and more. So basically, there's definitely a cool factor associated with what kind of food you are eating. But at the same time, so at the end of the day, in order to reach, especially make these young millennial consumers and all mainstream consumers in general, repeated users of alternative protein products, the taste has to be there, and
You're cutting out a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and finish your sentence, because it is right out of the Good Food Institute playbook. It's got to be taste, price, and convenience. I think that's what you're getting at. I'm sorry, Tao, you were cutting out there for a little bit. So I hopped in with some good food rhetoric: taste, price, and convenience. It seems that Tao's screen has frozen. I'm sure he's going to come back, so I'm going to throw it to Albert. What's next? So where are you? We talked about you creating community, being mentors and incubators, and then also investing and taking people to market. You've got some applications that have come in. You're about to choose your top 5 for this first year of mentoring businesses. What's on the horizon? What can we see from you guys?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is the challenge that we saw kind of early on, and still, to be honest, it still exists. I mean, we're still at a very early stage, right? I mean, I think globally, we're at a very early stage in terms of plant-based. Like we're a rounding error when it comes to sort of the meat industry, right? So it's still very early stage, and China is even more early stage. So, I think there's a lot of investors, capital, large players that are sort of sitting, waiting for these things to emerge. And because we're impact oriented, we said, okay, well, we can't wait till it'll naturally emerge. We want to try to catalyze as much as we can. And so we've been very thrilled to have many great partners that are, helping to fund, the operations and really go upstream to the early stage entrepreneurs to really create the investment opportunities of the future, right? And so that's why we're super excited about the applications. We, to be honest, weren't sure what we were going to receive. I mean, we knew that there was some entrepreneurs out there, mainly vegan businesses that were there, but we were pleasantly surprised that there are a lot of what we would call new age entrepreneurs that came out. So I'll give you an example. There's when we were campaigning to try to reach out to as many entrepreneurs as possible, one of our partners suggested an organization that is an association of MBA women, and
right.
And it's mainly women who have been trained outside of China, have done their MBAs outside of China, have returned to China, and are in businesses or looking for entrepreneurial ideas. And we said, well, how many people are in your own association? Is it like 400 or 500 people? They said, no, we have 10,000 members, right? So you think about, and when you do the numbers, right? A city with a population of Shanghai, and you look at over many years, you would have this accumulation of very talented, inspiring women entrepreneurs, right? And so we did a part of our campaign to kind of announce that we had this campaign to support early stage entrepreneurs in the plant-based space. We're looking for mission-driven entrepreneurs that want into this space. And that's a community that we're excited about because we believe that there's untapped potential in these groups of entrepreneurs out there. And so maybe right away, like we've gotten some applications, but because we're doing this over 3 years, we're just putting it out there to say, hey, we're here to support entrepreneurs. If you have an idea or you can connect with ideas, then maybe you can apply for cohort 2 or cohort 3 or cohort 4. Like that's and that's just one community. So we want to be able to tap into these various different communities so that we have a pipeline of great entrepreneurs that are focused on plant-based. And that's our mission is to support those communities. We feel that again, the macro environmental lens or the economic lens is pushing us in this direction. So we believe the tailwinds will overcome the headwinds that we have, in the hopefully the short term, but definitely the midterm and the long term.
And one of the things,
but you still need a good pilot. Yeah.
Yes, sure. One of the things that I find interesting in the United States, and I would venture a bet that it's going to be the same in China, is that because there has been historically so much publicity in the United States that you just eat meat, that's what you do. Like, don't even question it. That's what you do. There are all these pockets of people who don't want to eat meat and don't want to have dairy, and either it doesn't make them feel good or they recognize the environmental impact even though they don't talk about it, or they're friendly to animals and it's never sat well with them, or they just feel better, they're athletes. And there's all these people who don't talk about it, and then once it comes to the fruition by something like what you're doing, I bet you're going to find not just the entrepreneurs and the female business executives coming through, but I think I'm sure you already have found investors that were kind of waiting for this opportunity to arise, and they just hadn't been vocal about it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be very interesting. I'll throw this to, well, I guess either of you, but Tao's back. Welcome back, Tao.
Sure.
One of the headwinds that we have here is that there's so much lobbying and protecting of industry, despite its environmental impact and what that costs for all of us from a tax standpoint, despite the use of our taxes on subsidies. So there's a real protection of this industry. Do you have this in China?
You mean protection of the meat?
Yes. Is there any, are there lobby groups, or is it is the meat industry subsidized? Is there this concern about what will happen to the pig farmer? So we have to keep the industry, even though not many people want it, or less and less people want it. It's this kind of protection mentality.
The mentality is definitely there, but I don't think plant-based in China had reached the point where it is in the US now to meet the resistance, right? So, from this vested interest groups. We hope we are there. That in a way that's a good problem to have, right? So but we are not there yet. But at some point, as we continue to promote alternative protein products to replace animal meat products, that this problem will definitely be there at some point. That's why although we are not proactively seeking support from government stakeholders, but at some point we want the government stakeholders or policymakers to be in, so they can give their backing to the entrepreneurs, to the investors in this space.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Makes complete sense. So I have some exit questions for you. Some of them are fast one-word answers, but some of them are a little bit thoughtful. I'm wondering that we're all going to say, oh, it's plant-based. We know that that's the future. But beyond a plant-based future, let's say in the short term, 3 to 5 years, what are your predictions for China?
As far as I'm concerned, because, I was born in China, grew up in China. So I think I'm definitely seeing a lot of changes over the years in China, right? And a lot of things could turn around in China pretty quickly with the right steering. So I definitely think, Chinese people are becoming more health conscious, and they are more, care about, say, some of the external benefits that could be coming out of their food, I think that especially the younger generation people, although when they're out there, this not necessarily on their top their list, in terms of purchase factors. But I think people are definitely, especially with the ongoing pandemic, the COVID-19 going on in China, a lot of people either consciously or subconsciously is thinking about what kind of food they should be eating, what different kind of food they should be eating, what kind of different lifestyle they should be adopting, after the virus. So, they are not necessarily thinking about plant-based or alternative protein products. A lot of them not necessarily thinking about that. But I think this is a good opportunity for us to leverage to steer people in the right direction. So that's what we are hoping to do. But we need good entrepreneurs to make it happen, because at the end of the day, you need to have good products, right? To replace whatever products, traditional products people are eating. And also we also like I talk about, we need to establish this kind of product category before you start to have different brands, right? For product brands or company brands for alternative protein products. So I think that's key. That's why we have launched this incubator, so we can support an army of entrepreneurs from different geographies, exploring different pathways, doing different products, right? So hopefully some of them will be successfully figure out a way to help mainstream this kind of product, and also and create the kind of consumer awareness we want in China in order to most sustainably promote this kind of products.
Sure. Albert, would you agree? Is that your prediction for the next 3 to 5 years? And then in addition to that, I want to say, because Tao brought up health and nutrition and the recent pandemic, and it's making people consider what they should and shouldn't eat. I don't know if it's trackable, but have people been steering away from what the press has called wet markets? I'll be calling them retail slaughterhouses. Has there been a decline in interest in those? And then also, what are your predictions?
Sure. So maybe I'll just double down on what Tao mentioned. Again, we're very bullish on entrepreneurs, right? So it's tough in these days where you see so much international headlines around the pandemic, the social unrest, and many different issues that the world is facing right now, and these world trade, bifurcation of the world, and like trade imbalances, trade wars, and all these types of things. But at the micro level, when it comes to entrepreneurs, I mean, we couldn't be more excited about the entrepreneurial spirit that exists in the US, exists in China, exists all around the world, right? We just happen to be laser focused on China because we feel like that's where the most resources are needed for the scale of the problem at this point. But we sort of, of course, it's hard to not be distracted by all the stuff that's happening at the international scale. But when you get down to it, it's people doing great businesses. That's what we get excited about. As for the pandemic, I mean, I think I agree with Tao that this raises. I don't think people immediately jump from the pandemic to going to straight to plant-based.
No,
but I would say,
but it plants the seed.
Exactly. There is. People are thinking a little bit more about how their lifestyles and how it affects themselves as well as society, right? That there is a groundswell of and maybe it's also because people have time to think about this now.
Yes,
right?
as well, right.
So we see that there's a huge opportunity to leverage that curiosity, right? And if we can get one, entrepreneurs interested in this, but number two, if these entrepreneurs can have a value proposition that speaks to those unanswered questions in people, this issue came from a wet market, right? And so people are thinking about the interaction between humans and animals and whether that is, sustainable for the future, right? And so I think that there's a lot of openness, both within entrepreneurs as well as consumers, to consider new ways of doing things, right? But we don't want to miss out on that opportunity, right?
No.
On the opportunity, it's a wasted opportunity. So
yes,
that's what we're hoping to.
the time is now, most definitely. I will add to that as we globally try to practice social distancing, and there are 7 billion people on the planet, but 70 to 80 billion land animals that are slaughtered every year for food. And by definition, those 70 to 80 are not social distancing. We've in fact enforced that they will not social distance. So if you consider that only 10% of the living, breathing entities on the planet are social distancing and the other 90% are not, good luck outsmarting a pandemic. I think we will see something else in the future. Okay, my 2 cents. What do you wish you knew? And these are, now we're getting to the sort of the shorter answers. I'll start with Albert and throw it to Tao. What do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
I mentioned that about 7 or 8 years ago, I started getting more curious about sort of trying to pull back the curtain on the food system. So I wish that I'd come to this realization a little bit sooner. But I think the timing, and also just the innovation that's happening has been the trigger for us to get involved in this sector. So, I mean, I wish it came sooner. I wish it came sooner for everyone. but I think that we're hopefully going in the right direction now.
Tao?
Yeah, I echo what Albert just said, but on a personal level, 10 years ago, because I have like a 7-year-old son, so I wish, I knew I'm gonna have a 7-year-old son at that time, so I could have educated myself better on how to bring up how to deal with a 7-year-old at home all the time, especially during this pandemic situation. So he's a handful. It's
too funny. I think every parent across the globe is feeling you right now. It's been hard not to have being able to put everybody in school, et cetera. I'll say the one thing I wish I knew 10 years ago is that I wish I knew I had to advocate for myself, that I can't be listening to doctors that maybe or maybe did not get nutritional education. I can't be listening to governments and what they're advocating for me. I really need to do that research for myself. And I think most people will find that when they do their own nutritional research and they don't listen to the advertising campaign or the government campaign, they find that plant-based is such a great solution for them. But I won't even go that far. I'll just say everyone consider advocating for yourselves. Okay, again, Albert, and then to Tao, what's your favorite phrase if you're having a bad day? So if things aren't going your way and you need to turn yourself around mentally, what do you say?
Well, I mean, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be working in a space that I feel passionate about, right? And I'll draw back the curtain in that you prepped us for this question. So when I have a list of quotes that I keep on my phone, and so I was going through them with my 12-year-old daughter last night and saying, like, which one is the best one, right? And so we were reading through this, and so the one that I think is most relevant to this conversation is by Mahatma Gandhi, and it's the planet can support human need, but not human greed, right? So I really like that because I think it's so relevant to how we've disrupted or how we've let the food system go in such a wrong direction, right? And driven by greed, right? We can do much better and create products that people love, enjoy, feel that is delicious, but in just with much more respect for the world.
Yes, and I'll add that we have let the food system go at the expense of our greed and at the expense of ourselves, to our own detriment, as we are finding out, our health and the health of our planet. COVID-19 proving that point exponentially. Tao, what would you like to say, your favorite phrase if you're having a bad day?
Well, when it comes to the work I do, I'm definitely optimistic long term, but I also know that I need to be realistic short term. So there's two phrases I like the most and I use very often. So one is like, if there's a will, there's a way. And the other one is like a Chinese phrase, like old saying, versus stamina and times reveals a person's heart. So I think basically that's says a lot about what about us as impact investors and also the impact-oriented entrepreneurs we want to work with long term.
You were cutting out there a little bit. I want to make sure that I understand it. You said something about stamina, and then you said time reveals what's in your heart.
Yeah. So basically, yeah. So the that's the old Chinese saying. In Chinese is 路遥知马力, 日久见人心. So if you translate it in English, it's like distance tests a horse's stamina. Time reveals a person's heart. So that says a lot about us as impact investors. Hopefully, the entities we want to work with long term who are impact oriented.
Yes. I love that. Okay, now this one really is a one-word answer. You're super busy. You don't have time for lunch. You're running around. Albert, what is your go-to snack?
Noodle soup.
Noodle soup. Tao, what's your go-to snack on the run?
Dry roasted almonds.
Ooh, all right. Okay. Mine changes daily and they're always plant-based. I want to thank you, Tao Zhang and Albert Tseng of Dao Foods. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for taking on China. Thank you for caring about our future, our health, the planet, innovation, business, and it's also making money. Actually, folks, you can make a lot of money in the plant-based business world, which is why I have the Plant-Based Business Hour to bring in new investors to realize the market opportunities here to help us flourish these entrepreneurs. And we all do better from the planet standpoint, from the wallet standpoint, from the health standpoint. DaoFoods.com. If you're an entrepreneur, get yourself over to DaoFoods.com. They are going to be taking applications every 6 months. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Every 6 months, it's your chance to get in there, get great mentoring, get some funding and investment, and see your idea come to fruition for all of us on the planet. Albert and Tao, don't go away. Everybody else, I want to say thank you. Have a wonderful weekend. I will see you next Tuesday and next Thursday at 1:00 for the Plant-Based Business Hour. And of course, next Wednesday for the Awesome Vegans Influencer Series. Until then, everybody, thanks for all you do. Thanks for being vegan. And together, we're taking back our health and the health of the planet. Bye, everybody. Albert and Tao, don't go away.